The following is my review of
Super Meat Boy Forever!
Super Meat Boy Forever is a side-scrolling platformer developed by Team Meat and was released on December 23rd, 2020. Yeah, I hated the change, so I'm gonna address it right off the bat. For those of you who don't know, the first Super Meat Boy acted as a very fun but challenging new age platformer, with a charming theme, a casual yet funny story, and killer soundtracks. And what was interesting about that game is that it took its sequel, the game I'm reviewing now, for me to fully appreciate it. What Super Meat Boy Forever took away was the mechanic of the static level, where it's us controlling how we go about it. Instead, they replaced it with an always moving right, side-scrolling mechanic that only changes when the level demands it, and not when we do. I'll go ahead and say I didn't like that, so before I speak as a reviewer, I'm going to speak as a fan of the series, which are two very different things. Team Meat made a mobile game, and I hate that. I can't really express why I hate that. I even knew that they announced the sequel to be a mobile game, and I still hated it. Maybe it's because it felt like a huge FU to the fans who fell in love with the team because they provided platforming with a fun and inventive twist. Maybe it's because with the societal shift in consumerism, I thought the sanctity of indie games would be unblemished by the convenience of the mobile industry. Then I start to think, well, what do you expect? They're human beings who wanted to experiment with something new, and deserve to make a little money on the side. And they most likely never intended to offend the fans, and I totally get that. But from a fan perspective, I really wish they could have just perfected what they did in the first game. To a fan who thinks like me, this is paramount, especially when a sequel is concerned, because all we want is the comfort of the same characters and theme, but with a different tone or taste. What happened in Super Meat Boy Forever is that it didn't even feel like a traditional video game. It felt like I was playing on my phone, on my PC, and that kinda disgusted me. But this is all based off comparison of the previous game. You know what a more accurate feeling was? It's like Metallica releasing a pop country album. Like, sure, they could probably do it, and there's nothing wrong with that, but should they? And just because I got used to the side-scrolling doesn't mean I enjoyed it. That's a big dilemma in the gaming industry, when developers have the mentality that fans will just naturally ease into the thing they think is revolutionary. Instead, we got a second-hand mechanic tacked onto an amazing series that served to morph it into something I don't even recognize. Like, sure, you gave us Meat Boy and Bandage Girl, you even put a fresh coat of paint on them, but you made it feel like something we didn't expect, and to me as a fan, didn't especially like. That being said, and I admit this both as a fan and a reviewer, that this replacement of mechanic is literally the only thing I hated. And just because I didn't like it, doesn't mean it doesn't work in the game. Now on to the review. Super Meat Boy Forever differs from the first game in many ways. Firstly, the aforementioned mechanic change, and then the fact that there are only 6 levels per world. But this is because the levels are much longer and require slightly different movements and strategies. The levels are fast-paced, but leave room for marginal errors. That is to say, the platforming itself isn't all that difficult, especially if you've played the first game. However, the level design worked incredibly well with the new style. I wasn't feeling frustrated, and it didn't feel like a repetitive slog. The game had a certain rhythm and bounce to it that I couldn't explain until I realized what was happening. Apart from the platforming itself, this new side-scrolling mechanic works as a kind of visually stimulating glue for the rest of the game elements. You hardly remember it's there because you're focusing on different things at once, and that's an indication of a solid platformer. These elements come in the form of subtle manipulation of direction, well-timed jumps and reversals. There's even a certain level of combat that's its own obstacle. The enemies that can be used to propel yourself are simply means of hacking and slashing. There is no shortage of these game elements, that mostly work synergistically. Everyone's favorite game mechanic, the boss battle, is back and better than ever, featuring some unique methods of ending these fools. The boss battles mix these unique elements with traditionalist styles, like the fact that most of them require 3 hits, or 3 segments of hits to defeat them. They act as a very nice change of pace and reward for the levels, as they don't adhere to the left-to-right framework. It's rather the only times that we get a relatively static level where the same mechanics of the new game apply, but also that remind us of the insane creative strength of Team Meat. The boss battles are also where the soundtracks differ. Throughout the game, we get a different soundtrack per chapter that all seem to fit the script in terms of how music would sound in this environment and with these rules. In the boss battles, these are no different. All of a sudden, it's not just music for the background. It's music that transcends the game itself and propels the gamer into different levels of hype shit and violence. The boss battle music will make you not just want to beat them, but sacrifice them to Satan on an altar carved out of the tremendous pearlescent halls of Valhalla. That's to say, you'll love this soundtrack. The story also works as a traditional platform story. We get the story at the beginning, in between the levels, and at the end, with the levels being the kind of traveling methods for the characters in-game. We see the story, and then we act in between the story, and then we see it again. This style has always worked in platformers and does not fail now. The story is still born of a wacky, lighthearted group of minds who believe in the power of comedy, cuteness, and violence as forces that can live simultaneously in a narrative that has no agenda and no leanings. Unless, of course, providing funny cartoons for gamers is an agenda. This reinforces my idea that Team Meat didn't sell out and make a mobile game, rather they used all their creative faculties and experimented with a new method. If we look at this process in the eyes of the developers, we can see that this was a passion project that had the seemingly futile goal of being just different enough to be relevant. As a standalone game, it works well, and I don't really see a problem. As the sequel to Super Meat Boy, we the fans can question all day if this is worthy, especially since our collective biases stem from the fact that the first game was already considered to be one of the best platformers ever made. So off the heels of that, we are given something that is not that to many of us, and sometimes that can result in a wholly negative view about the entire game itself, even if these biases aren't relevant to the new game. This is a rather thin line that puts me in a difficult position as a reviewer, so it's because of this I'm going to score it differently, especially because I have too much emotional stake in this game, so it would not be fair to assign it a definitive number, but I will say this. Super Meat Boy Forever is a very good platformer made by a very sound team who knows the ins and outs of this genre well. The game, I think, works more as a spin-off of the series and not so much a sequel. I think the game is entertaining enough to warrant a full playthrough, and I even think most of you will enjoy it, and the bottom line, it's not a waste of time to play. I think if most of you come into this game expecting Super Meat Boy 2, you'll be a little surprised to experience the changes that might skew your perception, like it unfortunately did to me. As a standalone game, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. As the sequel to Super Meat Boy, 5 out of 10. This isn't a definitive score, just how I see it. Thanks for watching.